welcome to the second session about foundations of mathematics and computing, which is on Giuseppe's side. So, as we mentioned, Giuseppe's research from the start focused on mathematical theories underpinning programming languages, so from theory of computational complexity to recursion theory to category theory, etc. And the purpose was to build some rigorous framework for the theory of computer science, establishing new links between notions in computer science and mathematical structures. And our speakers will help better understand what I mean. So our first speaker is Simone Martini, who is a full professor of computer science at the University of Bologna, and he's also a researcher at the lab. Simone Martini received his PhD under the supervision of Giuseppe Longo at the University of Pisa. And actually, he was the first PhD student to complete the PhD under Giuseppe's supervision. He has a research interest in logical foundations of programming languages, as well as in history and philosophy of computing. And today he will talk about giving meaning to computations, the birth of a mathematical theory of computation. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So I will give a mostly historical talk on the creation of that field of studies or research, which is the mathematical theory of computation, on which Pepe gave his first very interesting contributions. And so, and then I will try to be as less technical as possible, and I will try also to reuse some of the words that have been used in the first talk of today, like myth and demythization and non-reductionism. Yeah. So you may know that the first programmable computer was the ENIAC in 1947 at the University of Pennsylvania. It was programmable, but this was the program. I mean, on the left, the physical wiring was the program. In order to understand what kind of wiring was necessary, also some kind of symbolic notation was used, and it is what is pictured on the right. So this was the first program run on that computer with a specific purpose, to give a Monte Carlo simulation of a nuclear fission. It was a program written by Clara von Neumann, the wife of John von Neumann. Now, if we see it from a natural science point of view, computation is just the emergent result of a physical process. There is a physical process, a continuous physical process, and from that physical process, a computation emerges. There is some symbolic coding at the start, the input. There is some symbolic coding at the end, the data which is the output of the computation. But in the middle, like in the science of nature, there is the big complex phenomenon, which is could be electronic, could be mechanical, could be pneumatic. The computations can be done in several ways. Now, how can we recognize the computation as the emergent result of the physical process? So how can we give a meaning to the computation to control the complexity, the evolution over time, without, of course, the simplistic reduction to the underlying physical process, which would make the emergent computation phenomenon just disappear? And this is the big challenge at the beginning. There is a problem on notation. How could we describe computations? This is from Goldstein and von Neumann, 1947. Coding is not a static process of translation, but rather the result of a technique of providing dynamic background to control the evolution of a meaning. So there is time there. The dynamic evolution. How can we make sense of this? So, and there are many physical aspects or many conceptual aspects there. There is time, the dynamic evolution. Then there is the fact that maybe the same input-output could be produced by different programs. Could we understand them in the same way, or should we distinguish them? And there are resources that are consumed during computation. Time, electricity, memory. And then there is the finiteness of the hardware. We have finite machines. But then there is the continuity of the physical process as opposed to the discreteness of the abstract description that we may give of the computation. Then the computation is the process, at least the process in that computation was sequential. First something, then something else. Should we take into account all of these details in order to give meaning to what a computation is? Well, the point is that there is a myth that should be dispelled, and the myth is that the computer science, even computers, comes from logic, from mathematical logic. Like Athena was born from the head of Zeus. Everything was done by Turing beforehand, and then we have just to apply Turing theory to engineer Turing's idea. Well, is Alan Turing the father of computer science? Well, contemporary history of computer science is many critiques of this idea. These are just some of the critical paper on the fact that we cannot take just computing as something that was born from mathematical logic. And then there is also someone that said, well, it was not Turing the father of computer science, because it was Gödel, the very founder of theoretical computer science, in the early 30s. Well, here we are really in the presence of l'illusion rétrospective du vrai. We are imposing on the past something. Thank you. You are imposing on the past something that was certainly not there when computing started its journey. We know that Turing had little influence on actual computers, and the mathematical theory of computation is a result of an agenda of the late 50s and then essentially early 60s. And I will try to give some of the main steps in this process. Of course, someone knew at the very beginning, for Neumann, Goldstein, Curien, Böhm, and I will just list some of them. Now, let me just stress that given meaning of computation is of paramount importance, because there is no computation in itself in nature. Computation is the result of a program, and programs are technical artifacts that are intentionally produced by humans to fulfill a practical function, and this specification, the purpose, the goal of the computation is not something that is intrinsic to the computation. It's fixed outside. And so when we give meaning, we take into account also this kind of issues that are not intrinsic to the computation process itself. So, as I said, in 1947, certainly someone knew, and certainly Goldstein and von Neumann knew, coding has to be viewed as a logical problem, and one that represents a new branch of formal logic. So logic is important there. Is important. It's so important that in the coding that John von Neumann developed, the flow diagram, flow charts, there are certain kind of boxes that are not there in order to specify the process, to specify the computation, but they are there only to specify what the computation will perform. There are assertion boxes, and the contents of the assertion boxes are one or more relations. Then indicates that only certain relations are automatically fulfilled whenever the control reaches that point. So there is a notion of correctness at the very beginning, intrinsic to the notation that was developed for programming ENIAC. And then Curien, of course, in this lecture at the London Mathematical Society, in principle, one should be able to communicate with this machine in any symbolic logic. There will be much more practical scope for logic systems than there has been in the past. Certainly, they knew about this, and 2 years later, in 1949, Curien again, the programmer should make assertions about various states that the machine can reach, and the checkers to verify that these assertions agree with the claims that are made for the routine as a whole. So there are claims, there are specifications which are external to the computation, and we must take into account all of this in order to give a meaning to what's going on in the machine. Let me just mention a third giant of those years. He was a friend of most of us. Pepe was not a student of him, but certainly he worked in an environment where Corrado Bem's influence was of paramount importance. So he did his PhD at ETH Zurich, and in 1952 he concluded his thesis, Calculatrice digitale, and the introduction, nous voulons admettre ce qui est assez plausible que les calculatrices les plus évoluées sont universelles au sens spécifié par Monsieur Curien. 1942, I think this is supposed to be the second computer science PhD thesis in Europe, and I think probably it's one of the very first reference that computers, programmable electronic computers, les plus évolués among elles, are instances of Turing machines, universal in the sense of Turing. There are several others important issues in Corrado's thesis, but saying that any computer is a universal Turing machine assumes, of course, a model, a semantics, because an actual computer is not a Turing machine. It's a finite autonomous. It's something that cannot be used as a universal Turing machine as such. And then there are some other things that I'll skip here. But then, this was the 1947 and 50, the giants. But programming in the 50s and later, so computing in the 50s was a very different story. Let me quote Donald Knuth. Donald Knuth is a mythical figure in computer science. So he is one of the founders of computer science as such. So I never heard of computer science. The accepted methodology for program construction was people would write code and make test runs, then find bugs and make patches, and then find more bugs, make more patches, and so on. We never realized that there might be a way to construct a rigorous proof of validity, even though I was doing nothing but proofs when I was in classroom. The early treatises of Goldstein and von Neumann, and of Turing, Böhm, Curry, which provided a glimpse of mathematical problem development, has long been forgotten. So, and this comes from someone that got his Turing Award when he was 36. So it was Stanford. He's the author of this big series of volumes, The Art of Computer Programming, that really founded computing as a computing science. The goal to provide a mathematical theory of computation is an explicit goal of John McCarthy. John McCarthy was first at MIT, then at Stanford in 1963, and in this paper in 1961 writes, "It is reasonable to hope that the relationships between computation and mathematical logic will be as fruitful in next century as the between analysis and physics in the last." So we're saying analysis and physics in the 19th century, the big foundation of physics, differential equations as the model of physics, and then the mathematical logic will be for computer science the same as it was differential equations for physics. And then it goes ahead in saying there will, by given a mathematical theory of computation, by giving meaning to computation, we will get many practical, quotes unquote, results. We will be able to develop a universal programming language. Universal means at that time usable for any kind of machines, because up to then languages were programs were specific to architecture, to branch of computing, to define a theory of equivalence of computation processes, to represent algorithms by symbolic expression, and so on and so forth. Then remember, what kind of issues should we, what kind of aspects of a computation should be maintained when given semantics? The time, the input-output, the resources that are used during computation. Well, all of them more or less disappear. We take into account the input-output behavior to programs that define the same input-output function are assumed to be the same semantics, same meaning. We forget about the continuity of the physical process, that computation is just a discrete computation given by an abstract description, and then, look and behold, the finality of the underlying hardware is forgotten again. So we assume, like in Böhm's thesis, that everything is, well, that we have an infinite execution model. And by doing this, and this is again John McCarthy, well, we hope that the reader will not be angry about the contrast between the great expectations of a mathematical theory of computation and the meager results presented in this paper. Well, meager results, but the foundations of a perspective on programming and programming languages that was the foundation for all the years to come in programming language design and programming language theory. Let me just make an intermezzo, a brief intermezzo, so trying to make a bridge to biology and to biological behavior. So I'm paying homage also to Bruno Latour, who died last week. So in 1979, Latour describing, doing sociology of scientific work, he writes, many aspects of laboratory practice could be ordered by looking at the transformation of rats and chemicals into paper. We need to make sense of what happens in a lab by using some notion of writing pictures, graphs. He calls them inscriptions. In the way in which anything and everything was transformed into inscription was what the laboratory was made for. When these resources, when this kind of organization, visual, graphical, conceptual organization were lacking, the same self-scientists stuttered, like I am in this moment, hesitated, and talked nonsense. They are not generic written tests, so it's an integration of several media, like geographical maps or molecular descriptions or even petri dishes. And then programming languages could be understood as inscriptions, because written programs are just simple two-dimensional Euclidean objects, but they represent complex time-dependent phenomena which are left implicit in the text. Well, and they cause those complex phenomena when run on a machine. But look, the absence of time from a program, from the description of a program, is what makes them useful. Easy to write, easy to understand, easy to manipulate. If we had to take into account also the dynamic inside the program, they would result in something that would be absolutely incomprehensible. And so what John McCarthy started was what I try to call the standard model of programming languages. So there are many founding fathers there. So to the contribution of the early founders, and then the more modern ones, John McCarthy, Bob Floyd, Tony Hort, Peter Landis, Christopher Strachey, and so on. But there is a common theme in their approaches. And the fact that we assume that during a computation, our computers do true arithmetic and they have unbounded resources. Of course, that is false. There is no true arithmetic in a computer. Everything is finite. At some point, I will exhaust the resources of my computer. But we assume, we reason about our programs as these limitations were not there. Because in this way, we could apply proof methods, and these proof methods could be applied directly to programs without transforming them in their semantic equivalent. So we have a text of a program, and by assuming that there is this standard model, true arithmetic and in principle unbounded resources, we can reason on the text as is we can reason on the text and obtain results on the intended semantics. Do I have 5 minutes?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yes. So, the main features of this of the standard model is, first of all, are compositionality. So I get the meaning of a complex program by the simple meanings of the elements of that program. Extensionality. We assume only input-output behavior. We don't look inside what happens during a computation. And then referential transparency. If I take a piece of the program and I substitute that piece of program with another with the same meaning, I would get the resulting program will have the same meaning. And then so there is this big the big vision of the 60s, of the early 70s. Computer programming is an exact science, in that all the properties of a program and all the consequences of executing it in any given environment can be found out from the text of the program itself, by means of purely deductive reasoning. But this is a result of assuming a model, which, of course, it's an abstraction of a reality. Here, the vision, the grand view is to have some mathematics for computing, some mathematics for computer science, like we have mathematics for structural engineering, where mathematical physics laws and empirical knowledge are used to understand, predict, calculate stability, strength, and rigidity of structure for building. And then mathematical logic would give that the same. The relationship between computation and mathematical logic will be as fruitful as that between analysis and physics. So, in a sense, the standard model for programming languages is what movement without friction is to mechanics. So there is no true pendulum there is no there is no pendulum in actual physics that like if you take two bodies and you throw them out of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, they won't reach the ground at the same moment. But still, the abstraction that they do, it's essential in order to start doing physics and to understand what mechanics is. But of course, in reality, real movement happens with friction. And sooner or later, also computer science had the need to cope with time, interaction with the environment, use of resources, all these aspects that were not taken into account at the beginning. Sometimes during the years re-entered the picture. And I'm mentioning this just one of this. So the fact that I said that, well, a computation, at least in the classical, original case, is sequential. Something comes before the other, and there are actions, there are events, and these are distributed in a sequential way. Well, for instance, at the end of the 70s, there was the notion of sequential algorithms. Pierre, who is talking about immediately after me, was one of the founder of this theory of sequential algorithms. So we have the standard model that at some point becomes complicated more and more in order to be more faithful to reality of what computation is. But let me conclude by saying that this give us an ontological interpretation, contrary to just a mechanistic interpretation, to reductionism. A program denotes. A program is there because it talks about the world, and we write the program because we want that program to act on objects of the world. Our programs act on our life every day. They are intentionally produced to fulfill a practical function, and as such, they have a big influence on our life. But by giving this ontological interpretation, programs also give on us an ethical responsibility. Programs are an important part of our life, and we should take this into account and to stand with this responsibility.
Like for the session just before, we just collected questions at the end of the two talks. So then I would invite the second speaker. So our second speaker is Pierre Curien, who is Emeritus Research Director at the Institut de Recherche en Informatique Fondamentale at CNRS at the Université de Paris. And it was actually Pierre Curien who invited for the first time Giuseppe in Paris. And then there were colleagues and collaborators for several years at the Department of Mathematics and Computer Science of École Normale Supérieure in Paris. He has a long research career dedicated to theoretical computer science, with research interests spanning from programming languages, proof theory, logic, and others. So we are ready for listening to the talk from the semantics of programming languages to the Condorcet paradox. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Barbara, and thank you to the audience, to Pierre, for a slightly more mathematical talk than the previous ones. So it's going to be an anachronical talk in the sense that I'm going to speak about notions that emerged in the semantics of programming languages, of which we heard a little bit from Simone in his talk, that happened in, let's say, 50 years ago, something like that, and something that happened at the time of the French Revolution, when Condorcet invented a voting system that is called the Condorcet vote, and I will explain some unexpected connections between these two moments in history. Okay, so how do I change? Huh? Ah, les flèches, ben oui, les flèches, oui. À droite, à gauche, à droite, à gauche. Niente di niente. Tutto rotto. Ah. Ok. Okay, so I need to complete a little bit the introduction given by Simone by introducing another big name in the domain called Dana Scott, okay, who arguably also played an important role for Pepe Longo in his early research. So Dana Scott is responsible for having brought to the attention of computer science some important results from recursion theory. So I'm not going to do recursion theory today, but he imported the idea that partial functions are important more than functions, and partial functions have a very nice feature. They have a natural order. A partial function can be more defined than another partial function. So there's an order of information. Function is better than another if it has just a larger domain of definition, and when it is defined, it coincides. The two coincide. Okay, so that's the notion of partial order between partial functions, and more generally, the idea was to give meaning to programs that can terminate or not terminate, like, well, typically in Turing machines. Or the whole theory of computability is about machines that possibly never stop. So the idea is to interpret a computation that does not terminate will be interpreted by the minimum element of some partial order. Okay, and the minimum element will be always denoted by this small symbol here that you can see, bottom. Okay. And okay, and for example, if you do ordinary logic, you would think that you have only two values, okay, true and false. But with this idea that your value, true or false, is the result of some computation, if this computation never terminates, then there is a third value for this computation, which is bottom. Okay, so the idea is to interpret your programs in partial orders. They always have a bottom, and then, well, for the sake of this talk, I will only consider ordinary sets, like the set of two values, true or false, or the set of just one value, which I call top, okay, and which you can think as an answer yes or no, as an answer I'm terminating. Okay, so you can see this top as a signal that the program terminates. Okay? And I don't care about the value, I just care about the fact that it terminates. So that's the meaning, the intuitive meaning of this top here. And on the top of these ordinary sets, so on the left, just the set of two values, true, false. On the right, just a singleton made of top. I add artificially this bottom, and I decree that bottom is the smallest element, and that this is the only way to compare two elements. So true and false are not comparable. These are definite values, and there is no notion of order between them. Okay, so that's the setting. We have very simple partial orders, and for the talk I only need exactly these two partial orders, the one which I call bool bottom and the other which I call one bottom. And then I'm interested in functions that are monotone, so they preserve the order, between a power of bool bottom to one bottom. Okay, so it takes as input a tuple of truth values and returns I'm satisfied or not. Okay. Okay, so there is one convenient way to represent such functions, namely you take the minimal situations in which the function is happy. The minimal situations where you give an input to f and the result is top. So something the computation has finished. And you take all the minimal such situations, all the minimal inputs for which this happens, and you form a matrix with them. Okay, so each line of the matrix is a minimal point where the function has the value top. Okay, so that's good. That's a setting to discuss about functions. And you see that this represents partial functions, okay, and even a bit more than partial functions, because if you want to say that a function is partial, you can disguise it into a total function that returns bottom when it is not defined. Okay, it's a small trick. Okay, so this is just to say that we are really speaking in our head about partial functions. And then, okay, so then this is essentially the setting of Dana Scott. And Scott, in an influential paper, said that the following function that I show at the bottom of the slide was problematic. Okay, and we will see what it means to be problematic. But let's see the function. It says that in order to be happy, to produce top, the function can produce top if you read the first line, it says either my second argument is true, then I can produce top, or my first argument is true, that's the second line, and I also produce top. Okay. This is problematic. Why? We'll see in a minute. Okay, so a little bit later, my informal advisor, who was Gérard Berry, a well-known French computer scientist, was interested in killing this problematic function, and he decided to introduce the notion of stable function. And a stable function is, by definition, one in which the minimal points, the one which I put on my matrix here, are all incompatible. Incompatible means they don't have a common upper bound. So let's see why the problematic function is killed by this condition. So that's in the middle. Oh, sorry, in the middle of the slide, you will see indeed parallel or is not stable. So you see that both lines, bottom true and true bottom, they have a common upper bound which is true true. So they are compatible. And this contradicts the notion of stable function for which all minimal points should be incompatible. And another more intuitive way to understand this definition is to see that whenever the function produces top on some input, x1, x2, xn, there is always a minimum cause for this to happen. There's a unique minimum element below this x such that the function produces top. So there's a cause for a uniquely identified cause for f to terminate. Or if you prefer, in terms of the talk of Simone, there is a minimum part of the input that is actually used by the computation. The computation uses resources. The resources are parts of the input, and not all of the input contributes to the production of the result. And stability tells you that you have exactly a core part of the input, a uniquely defined core part of the input that is responsible for this. Okay. But Berry, he was happy to have this notion of function, but he also noticed that there were functions that are stable in his sense, but that are problematic. Okay, we still don't know what problematic is, and the function is written here. Okay, and let's see. So this function is clearly stable. Okay, let's do the exercise. It's stable. To see that it is stable, we have to see that every pair of lines in the matrix is such that you find a proof that they are incompatible. And for ordered tuples, for tuples to be incompatible, there must be one coordinate in the input where you see the incompatibility. So let's take the first two lines, bottom true, false, false, bottom true. We see that on the third column of the matrix, we have a false in the first line and a true in the second line, showing that there is an incompatibility, because remember, my order does not compare true and false. Okay, so, good. And there is a definition that exactly says that something is problematic. So now mathematical definition of being problematic is to be non-sequential. So in both cases we found functions, the first one which was called parallel OR, and the second one which is called Gustave, because Gustave is a nickname for Berry for some reason. And in both cases, these functions are not sequential. And I will not detail the definition here, but I will just rephrase it in a way that is more easy to understand. A function is sequential if I can program it in a sequential language. And what does it mean? It means that I have a program, and this program has to start with an if blah blah, then blah blah, else blah blah. So it starts with an if then else. And the question is what you put in the if part. The if part is clearly the thing that you execute first. Until you don't know what if the thing in the if is true, then you don't know if that you have to go to then or to else. Okay. So here you see that a sequential program will have to decide which of the coordinates of the input the program wants to examine first. So it will have to start with if xi equals true for some, or false, it doesn't matter, but the important thing is the program has to choose an I, a coordinate, one coordinate. The program has to take a risk, okay? The risk of rejecting many possible inputs that could produce something while the ith coordinate is not defined. And now if we return to our function here, you see that it is not sequential because on the matrix representing its minimal points, the diagonal is filled with bottom. What does it mean? It means that for each coordinate, there is a way to reach the value top without knowing the coordinate on the diagonal. And since you have bottom in all positions of the diagonal, it means that you have a way to escape using any of the coordinates. Okay, so you mean for each coordinate there is a way to produce top that will not compute this coordinate. Okay, but I do not insist too much on non-sequentiality because in the rest of the talk I will be very interested in functions that are problematic in the sense of Berry. So, for the rest of my talk, I'll be interested in what I call a Gustave function, which is a function that is stable but not sequential. And to be, there's a simple test for seeing what is such a function. It's a function whose matrix, the matrix of minimal points for this function, can be put in the form that, in such a form that you have first n lines. Okay, it's an mn matrix, so m lines and n columns, and the first n lines should have a diagonal of bottom. So you have a square matrix from the top of the matrix. If you look only at the bottoms, at the end of the bottoms you have a square matrix, and it should have bottoms on the diagonal. Okay. So, second part of the talk, absolutely unrelated. We are now in the time of pre-French Revolution, so Monsieur le Marquis de Condorcet was a distinguished scientist, and he wrote this essay. And I'm now explaining what is the part of this essay that is relevant now. So it's a voting system that we can formalize in the following way. We have a set of candidates, C1 to Cn. We have a set of voters, and while we assume that there is an odd number of voters for obvious reasons. So V1 to V2 capital N plus 1. And the rule of the vote is that each voter has to return a complete order of the candidates. So he doesn't say, I want Marine Le Pen. He says, I prefer Marine Le Pen to Zemmour, for example. And, well, hopefully he also prefers another candidate to that too. But okay. So he puts a total order on the candidates. Every voter, she puts. And that's the data of the vote. So this is called a Condorcet ballot. And then, now I'm at the dépouillement. I don't know the English word, so when you evaluate the vote, what you have to do is to make binary comparisons between candidates. So you look at, for each pair of candidates C and C prime, you look at how many people preferred C to C prime, and well, there is more than a half that did that, because the others preferred the other way around. It's a total relation. Everyone has to vote for the total order. And then you say that the candidate C prime beats C if a majority of the voters have placed C prime above C in his ranking, in his global ranking. Okay? And then, if you're lucky enough, you see that there will be a candidate that beats all the others, and I think everybody will be happy, and he will be called the winner. Okay? Problem, there is a paradox in the sense that this process of election can have a kind of deadlock in the sense that it will not clearly designate a winner. So this is the basic situation. The basic situation, you have 3 candidates, A, B, C, 3 voters, 1, 2, 3, and the voter number 1 places A above B above C, and then 2 makes a circular permutation. He puts B above C above A, and then 3 makes another cyclic permutation and says that C is above A is above B. Now if you count a little, you see that the majority of people will place A above B because of 1 and 3. Voters 1 and 3 do so, but not 2. And you will see that in the same way, B is preferred to B is preferred to C by the majority, and C is preferred to A by the majority. And then nobody prefers. So it's a circular permutation. There is no winner. So this is called the Condorcet paradox. Okay, so now I have to explain you why this has to do with the first half of the talk. Okay, so I'm trained in mathematics, so I try first to abstract a little bit from the situation, and the voters do not play a real role in this story. What plays the role is, well, what plays the role more abstractly is a set of candidates from C1 to Cn, and a relation on this set, a binary relation, which is total and strict. So what total and strict means? It means that for every pairs of elements in my set, if they are not equal, then they are strictly comparable. So either C is less than C prime or C prime is less than C. But I don't ask my relation to be transitive. Okay, so this is I still now I have again this. Okay, I hope you can see the top line. Well, for the moment it's okay. Okay, so I'm abstracting from the voters. I only consider now a set of candidates. Yes, merci. Top. Yeah, a set of candidates and a strict total relation on this set of candidates. And I decide to represent the data of this strict relation in the form of a matrix. And the trick is the following. the matrix has n columns and n lines, and at the cross point of the I-fline and the J-fline, I put true if the candidate, this is the definition of the matrix, the entry at ij of my matrix is going to be true, bottom, or false, depending whether I is equal to j, so Ci is equal to Cj, or Ci beats Cj, or Cj beats Ci. Okay. So this gives me a matrix. And if I translate my paradox of the last slide into this matrix form, I find exactly the matrix of the function Gustave from the first half of the talk. So, we've met before. Okay. So now, I'm a mathematician, and I give a name to such matrices. I recognize some properties I recognize some matrices, some properties of the matrices arising from Condorcet votes as defined in this slide. So I remark that in these matrices, they are square matrices. One. The diagonal is filled with bottoms, and there are no bottoms outside the diagonal. Two. And finally, it's a kind of duality or Hermitianity, for if you want to be snobbish. So if you think of false to be the dual of true and the bottom to be the dual of itself, then you see that you have the stability under transposition of my matrix. Okay. So such a matrix that has all these properties, I call it semi-Condorcet for some reason. And now I want to understand better the phenomenon of having or not a winner in a Condorcet vote. So I want to try to understand the situation in which there is no winner. Okay, so first of all, if I just want to understand if there is a winner, that's really easy. I look at my matrix, and if there is a line which has true everywhere, except at the bottom place, then I have a winner. Okay. But I'm interested in characterizing the in getting information about the absence of winner. How much time do I have?
5 minutes. Is it okay?
Yeah, sort of. Yes, okay. So I'm interested in understanding the situation in which there is no winner. Okay, and now I can do something a little bit more philosophical. I want to show that there is actually a unique cause of not having a winner. Given a Condorcet situation, which has no winner, there is a minimum set of candidates which is responsible for the absence of winners. Well, it's a bit strange because after all, it is the voters who decide. So, but there is a minimum set of candidates together with the restriction of the strict partial order on this subset, which is responsible for the absence of winners. So this process is itself a stable function, in the sense of belief. Okay, so how do we do that? We do that by a small algorithm. So we design a small algorithm to determine this subset, which is minimal subset, which is responsible for the absence of winner. So here there is a key definition that does not go back to Condorcet, but go back only to 11 years ago by Gérard Huet. So Gérard Huet analyzed, before I took over and did a little bit more on this little problem, Gérard Huet already had examined it, and he found this notion to be very important. The notion of a candidate that beats another, but it beats him the candidate beats him very, very seriously, so he defeats it, the other candidate. In which sense? In the sense that it defeats him, but it also defeats all the candidates defeated by the other one. Okay? So this is a very, very strong form of victory of candidate C over C prime. And the reason why this relation is very relevant, the mathematical reason, is that this relation is transitive. So it's somehow correcting, it's somehow helping my initial relation to become transitive. So that's a good mathematical reason for its relevance. And now the algorithm proposed by Gérard Huet is the following. He says, well, you take your set of candidates. If you see that one is defeated by some other one, well, he's not worth running in the competition, so let's put him aside. And then we have a restricted set of candidates. Let's see if there is another one which is defeated by someone which remained in the lot, etc., etc. And the proposition proved by Huet in 2011 is that there is a winner in the game if and only if this iterative process of removing defeated candidates ends up with just one final candidate, and this one is the winner. Okay. So again, I'm interested in the situation where the algorithm stops before that, and I call this, when the algorithm stops and shows by stopping too early, shows that there is no winner, I'm interested in the place where the algorithm stops, and I call it the Condorcet core of my problem, the core of my problem. And while it's easy to see that this algorithm, although it seems to be non-deterministic because you choose candidates, but it doesn't depend on the order in which you chose candidates, so it's intrinsic. And okay, so I call it the core. And now the question is, which functions among the Gustave functions are the Condorcet functions? Because we saw a connection between our stable non-sequential function of the first half of the talk and the Condorcet paradox. And the answer is at the bottom of this page. Okay, so how many minutes? Zero. Zero. Okay, so there is the statement says that we need an additional condition on our semi-Condorcet matrices to characterize exactly those that are characterizing the absence of winner for Condorcet paradox. And then okay, let me finish the talk by okay, so let me very radical, because I have exactly -1 minute, 0 minutes. Okay, so let me just finish. Well, I think the message more or less got through. So the moral of this little story is, first of all, unexpected connections. Okay, I'm not saying that there's something deep going around here. So in particular, the bottom in the second part of the talk has absolutely no relation, in my opinion, to the bottom of Scott, because it's bottom when I is equal to J. Okay, it's something that is very, very decidable. So it's something. It's more like unexpected connections. Okay, I just want to mention that unexpected connections of a slightly larger scope happened with the development of stability. The notion of stability, which I discussed briefly, has given rise to something called linear logic, created by Jean-Yves Girard, who is one of the French star logicians, and had a lot of influence in computer science. But I'm not covering that here. But just I also call it unexpected connections in the sense that Girard also worked on stability for different reasons, and from stability he moved to something called linear logic, and well, this was also an unexpected development. Then another moral of this little story is that identifying the appropriate level of generality was crucial to make this analysis, and I need for this to still use 30 seconds. I should have explained this, but I don't have time. When I did my abstraction, forgetting about the voters, did I cheat on you? No, I did not, because I have a proof here that every set of candidates for which you give me an arbitrary strict total relation, I can create for you, I'm a real Putin, you know, I can create for you a set of voters that will produce this strict relation. Okay, and the algorithm is not too difficult. Okay, that's the end. Sorry. En hommage à Pépé avec beaucoup d'affection.
I would invite Giuseppe here with the speakers. For a discussion.
Does it work? Shall I?
Yeah, if you have some remarks.
Well, thank you very much. I think we had an insight into fundamental trends.
Je suis pas sûr que mon micro marche.
Okay. One is the very origin of this capture by mathematical logic of actual computing, because it's right. I mean, serial computability was invented in the 30s, no doubt, but it was an independent engineering history which was developing also. And then suddenly a link popped out. That's absolutely true. So it's not fair really to just refer to the work in the 30s, mathematical work in the 30s, because what mattered is that during the 50s, this was this understanding how mathematical logic, in particular theory of computability, could faithfully provide a theoretical frame. In a sense, it's the kind of effort we are trying to do, entirely different perspective in biology. But then there was already a beautiful theory of computation, which of course then was much enriched since the 50s. And gave this theoretical frame which was missing where results were proved. Personally, I think that what was missing at the beginning was the semantics, in the broad sense of correlating the formal writing and the formal deductions of mathematical logic to actual mathematical structures. I mean, computing a function is one thing, understanding what a function does in a suitable geometric space is a further contribution. First of all, as we notice, is because when you embed in a structure of meaning or geometric meaning an abstract formal computation, for example, what happened, you know that very well, you may provide extension of the formal system because it says that there may be more formal structure interpreted in the geometric mathematical environment. And that's what actually happened. So for many of us interested in the foundation of mathematics, mostly philosophical meaning of this wording, they suddenly discovered that these very tools could be applied and have relevance. First of all, it was very pleasant. Second, it was a major advantage because a lot of logicians and mathematicians with foundational interests found jobs in computer science departments. And I personally, this was my history, and also when I forced in computer science department a course of mathematical logic that was not desired at the beginning, then I happened to have in that course in the 80s the best students of the department attending the course, including Simone, and this was capturing the best students in computer science, but also in mathematics. I remember with Katusha Palmidesi, we made a survey of the students attending my first course in mathematical logic in '81, which was the first in Pisa. And out of the 20 students, 15 were all professors somewhere, doing research. It was an amazing group of people. So there was this capture that's been very fruitful, this enlarged the applications. But of course, the fact remains that there is this autonomous world of computation that we heard about now that has been shaping the world. And I think we should have more concern and insight. It's been shaping the world by giving this fantastic machine their networks, whose use is twofold. On one side is putting knowledge and memory of humanity at disposal of humanity. On the other hand, we know that because of this theoretical structure of logical determination, there's also a role of control. A role of control and guidance that is not what we want. When we understand that the actual idea of having formal rules leading behavior and big data providing the basis for practices without meaning, then we go backwards before the attempts of many of us to give meaning in mathematical structures, and for me to give meaning in human action. So this dichotomy is still there. I think you can witness with work independent of meaning, which happens in computer science till now, and in these applications, which is mostly a political choice. Using these machines for control instead of invention, connections between humans, and provide tools for science, but sometimes even trying to replace scientific knowledge by mechanical performances, like the myth about big data is a good paradigm. And that's why with Alessandro Sarti, Nicola Boulot, and Manuel Monteville, we started the group Cardano, which really wants to move from a mathematics and the computing of control to one of invention and connection among humans. And that's the perspective that, in a sense, derived also from the interest many of us had in semantic structures, mathematical semantic structures. It was the first tentative to open the purely formal reasoning to a sort of meaning limited to mathematics. Now we have to broaden this to the understanding of these powerful tools of computing, to a more meaningful embedding into our human activities, which is not done, in my opinion. It's a major challenge, which is still open. And that's essentially for political reasons, essentially for the hegemony, where very small groups of people who control the networks, make the new proposals where to go, and so on, which is escaping, I think, from the sense of democracy and human dialogue, and it's a major challenge we have to face now. I see some sort of continuity, of course, with the work which was mentioned before, because the idea even of transferring to life the formal structure of deduction and computing, like is done in the dominating paradigms in molecular biology, is the other component, is loss of meaning. Instead of human activities, that case is biological dynamics, which is the other issue. Well, okay.
Are there questions from the audience? I'm afraid we have to use this microphone.
Je peux poser juste une question au deuxième intervenant?
Mais il faut utiliser
le micro. En français.
Oui, ça.
Je comprends.
Moi aussi.
J'ai été très curieux d'entendre votre exposé, je ne suis pas logicien. Malheureusement, vous n'avez pas eu assez de temps à la fin pour bien expliquer ce que vous tiriez de cette comparaison entre les résultats du paradoxe de Condorcet, cette espèce de truc qui est non séquentiel et stable dans ce que vous évoquez au début de votre exposé, j'ai juste une question. Donc, on voit bien que vous cherchez un minimum de conditions qui vont faire que ça va déclencher un paradoxe.
Oui.
Ça j'ai compris ce que vous cherchez, mais
Voilà.
après, je ne sais pas comment vous arrivez à le trouver. Bon,
D'accord.
mais ce que je peux vous poser comme question, c'est ce paradoxe, il n'est pas anodin. On parlait de la biologie, mais on pourrait parler des sciences sociales et de l'économie, puisque, en fait, derrière ce paradoxe, il y a aussi, si on prend à la place du vote, si on prend la fonction d'utilité,
Oui.
on a le problème du passage des utilités individuelles à l'utilité collective, et on a le théorème d'Arrow, en effet. Voilà. Et donc, je voudrais savoir, qu'est-ce que... Donc, c'est-à-dire, on a quand même des limites très strictes au langage utilitariste en économie, que les gens ne connaissent pas d'ailleurs, souvent. Hein. Je vois encore moins les philosophes. Hein. Encore bourrés de philosophes utilitaristes, ils ne connaissent rien à ça, c'est à mourir de rire de lire leur papier. Bon. Mais donc, qu'est-ce que votre approche là pourrait changer à ce point-là? Ça a un sens? Parce qu'il y a quand même de grands économistes qui ont réfléchi sur ça, comme Amartya Sen. Et donc, qu'est-ce que l'approche? Est-ce que vous pensez que ça peut avoir un sens ou c'est complètement, ou vous en foutez complètement? Voilà la question.
Bon, la réponse facile, c'est plutôt que je m'en fous complètement. Mais non, j'ai trouvé que j'ai regardé ce truc-là comme un matheux. C'est une question intrigante. Certaines fonctions dites de Gustave dans mon exposé, c'est-à-dire certaines fonctions stables non séquentielles correspondent à cette situation de paradoxe de Condorcet, donc puis-je les caractériser? D'accord. Et donc c'est effectivement la partie que je n'ai pas eu le temps de développer, donc j'ai une caractérisation, j'appelle ça les fonctions de Condorcet, c'est une jolie caractérisation. Et après la question suivante que je me suis posée en tant que matheux, c'est est-ce qu'il y en a beaucoup des fonctions de... Enfin, est-ce qu'on peut les énumérer? Et par exemple, j'ai trouvé que dans les matrices 4-4, il n'y en a aucune. Bon, c'est bizarre, mais s'il n'y a que 4 candidats, eh ben, il y a toujours forcément un gagnant. C'est quand même étonnant. Donc voilà, faites des élections avec 4 candidats et ça marche. Et c'était pas prouvé ça. Bon, maintenant, après, les liens avec l'économie, ben, si jamais je dois écrire un petit papier à partir de ça, j'essaierai de fouiller un peu la question.
Ah oui, il y a un enjeu.
Oui, je pense. Mais ce que je pense, c'est que ce qui est relativement intéressant, c'est quand il y a une situation de blocage, donc soit électorale, soit économique, pouvoir déterminer le cœur du problème, bah c'est une information comme une autre. C'est pas une information positive, mais ça dit qui sont les emmerdeurs.
Just, I will try to keep it brief, but actually it's interesting that in this field there are different ways to raise questions about what we should theorize. It's to say there is computation, there are computers, and here there is physics that enter into the picture, for example. And in French it's informatique, so it's not the same connotation, and it's maybe also more open to social practices. And so the philosopher Bernard Stiegler raised a bit of a challenge shortly before he passed, which is to re-theorize l'informatique théorique in French. And the way I see it is, and it goes a lot with what you said, that there is idealization like in physics, and it's mandatory to do science. But in a sense, one core idealization that is done in theoretical computer sciences is to study computer as isolated systems with an input, but it's just an input. If we change the object and look at computers plus human, then the object changes completely, the epistemology changes completely, because human beings are not well defined by mathematical structures and so on. And then we can also raise a lot of challenges. Some of them are very practical. For example, what happens on platforms like GitHub, where people do programming and you have historicity of programs and so on. But also what happens for democracy, via social networks and so on. So you can study then reciprocal interactions between computations in the computer sense and human activity. So that's the opening.
Yeah. course. What he presented was very so the kind of theory computation that focuses on the input-out behavior shaped the way in which we understood program and programming. But of course, some of us, well, some of computer science, got too much in love with the models, and so we stick to this, and this is limiting actually our understanding of what happens. So now we are programming our things by gesture, by interacting with them. Is there a model for this? Is there a model that can give us a way of informing non-technical people in charge of making decisions? Like our previous model gave us tools for designing programming language. Now, are there new models for guiding the social impact of this? That's a big problem. The computer science and informatica in Italian is not ready for this. It's a big problem. You know, there has been attempts to capture interaction, the fact that there is no isolated computers, but they interact with agents, exactly with the same model. So Peter Wegner in the early 90s started to model interactions with Turing machine with oracles, but this is going to be useless. You should think of new models, and you should realize that just the raw computation is not enough to explain. We need more concepts, and this will be the result of computer scientists, philosophers, normal people, scientists at large.